Brunette, Director of Education with the Mosby Heritage Area Association, and I'm here with World War I historian James Taub, and we're here at the Leesburg Courthouse standing in front of the World War I Memorial, which commemorates the Loudon lives lost during the conflict in Europe. Now, one of the interesting things about this monument, apart from its British design, is also on the placard with the names of those deceased. We have an interesting distinction between those names listed here at the top in columns, and then a clear dividing line where 3 names are drawn out from the rest. Now, it's one of the unfortunate situations of the time that the armed forces, as well as American politics at that time, were segregated. And so this is the only monument here at Leesburg Courthouse where we actually see that segregation lined out on the memorial. So while Loudoun County had a large number of African American residents, they did not have the same life experiences as many of their white neighbors, and that played out in World War I involvement as well. So we have these 3 individuals, one of which is Ernest Gilbert here. He's a private. All of the African Americans that signed up for the draft during World War I, like Ernest Gilbert, when he was called up in June, he was sent down to Camp Lee, Virginia, near Petersburg, to train. But of course, he wasn't training in the same way that other armed combatants were. Instead, they were also being prepared to do a lot of the manual labor, a lot of the building, a lot of the skilled architectural work as well that would be needed to actually make, to get troops from one point to the other, to get technology from one point to the other, and also to get arms from one point to the other. And so finally, in August of 1918, Ernest Gilbert and the rest of the guys from Camp Lee who are being recruited into the 535th Engineer Corps are sent over to northeastern France, specifically to the Toul sector in Lorraine, where they're going to be building railways between Toul and other neighboring towns like Commercy, Primont-la-Forêt, places like that. And so while they're there, they're arriving right in early October by the time they get there. October of 1918, of course, is going to be a very sticky situation there in northeastern France. And so, James, would you tell us more about what these guys in the 535th and other engineer corps might encounter during that time?
Absolutely. So like you said, October of 1918 is an incredibly sticky time during the First World War, particularly for the United States. October 1918 remains America's bloodiest month ever. We think about Antietam being the bloodiest day of American history. October is the bloodiest month, because we're at the height of the Meuse-Argonne offensive, coinciding with the worst of the Spanish flu. Now, Ernest and the rest of the rear echelon troops, both white and African American, would have been suffering just like the soldiers at the front, but particularly from the diseases that you caused. Now, World War I is the first war, really, in modern history where you have just as much activity going on behind the lines as you actually do on the firing lines. This is the first time in history where you have soldiers who are fighting up at the front, needing to be supplied, and have this huge chain of logistics going on behind them, all the way back to their homes back in the United States, producing the war materiel that is required to continue fighting on the Western Front. And Ernest and the rest of the men of his engineer outfit are contributing to that immensely by building these railroads, repairing these railroads, making sure all of the supplies are arriving not only for the soldiers of the American Expeditionary Force, but as well for the soldiers of the French, British, and other Allied armies serving on the Western Front, who are consuming just an immense quantity of material that had not been seen before in any sort of world history, let alone American military history. Just to give you an idea, the first night of the Meuse-Argonne bombardment, which is the night of September 25th, 26th, 1918, American artillery fires more shells than the Union Army did during the entirety of the Civil War. That's a 5.5-hour long bombardment where they're consuming all of that material. You're also thinking you need all of those men, all of the horses that are required to move those wagons, those field artillery pieces, needing food, they're needing fodder, they're needing all the medical supplies, they're needing extra equipment, they're needing all of their ammunition. So Ernest is providing just an insanely exceptional job. Now, it's also as important noted, obviously this monument and the U.S. military forces, unfortunately back then, were segregated. And for the African Americans serving in the American Armed Forces, they're going to be entering a world which is completely foreign to them and literally foreign to them. When they arrive in France, they see a society which absolutely still has racism, much like they experienced in the United States, but it's not until the United States Army arrives in many of these French towns that Ernest would not be allowed to eat at the same restaurant as any other soldiers. Him and other African American soldiers are going to meet soldiers of the British and the French Empire, who, again, are experiencing racism in their own cultures, but they would not have been denied entry into a restaurant. They would not have been...
Or theater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They would not have been limited promotion based on the color of their skin or of their religion. And so these men are going to meet soldiers of, say, the Senegalese Tirailleurs, the Zouaves, or the Tirailleurs Africains, or the Gurkhas, the soldiers of the Indian Army, where their armies are taking particular care to adhere to their needs, their religious customs, and treating them for the most part as equals, although there is some existential and definitely still some residing racism. But the African American soldiers like Ernest, who unfortunately Ernest doesn't, but those soldiers who survived their experiences in France come back to the United States and say, well, what did we fight for? The soldiers serving over there in Europe had it better when they were soldiers in the army than they did when they came back to the United States, and they're going to start the basis of the modern civil rights movement. So it's going to be an incredibly important time, and it's because of the African American soldiers serving in the United States Armed Forces during the First World War that we see, you know, racial tension and sort of ethnic diversity and the birth of the modern civil rights movement grow out of the 1920s into the 1930s until you get to the generation of Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s.
We do see a tremendous amount of contributions to the war effort from the Black communities here. It's something like 370,000 African Americans that serve overall in World War II, I think. And so while this memorial pays tribute to the three who we know passed away during the war, there were many other African American veterans from Loudoun County and from the Heritage area that contributed to the civil rights area and contributed to their communities in the coming decades. And you can still find a lot of these individuals in memorials, in cemeteries as well. We encourage folks to come and visit Ernest Gilbert. He's buried in the Mount Zion Church here in Leesburg, Virginia. And so this past is still very present to us here today. And you know, I think that we've wrapped up that concept nicely for here. Is there anything else you'd like to say about?
No, I would just say that it's important that when we think about the the tensions which existed and have existed throughout all of American history, we look at soldiers like Ernest Gilbert and like Valentine Johnson and like Samuel Thornton and say they lived in a society that didn't treat them as equals. Even in death, they were not treated as equals, and yet they still went and they still served. And they laid a basis to make sure that the society which we live in today is still developing to make sure that we're all treated as an equal society and that everybody looks the same to everybody else. So I think it's really important, especially that we look at this World War I generation of both African Americans and soldiers from all sorts of minorities. It's important to remember that 1 out of 5 of all the doughboys were not born in the United States. You have one division, the 77th Division, which recruits out of New York City, that boasts 42 different languages being spoken. So this is an incredibly diverse army, not only in skin color, but ethnicity, religion, language, all of the above. And that's really where you see the first major mixing of this American melting pot. And soldiers like these three are going to be the ones that really help to contribute to that and develop this idea of that we're all Americans together.
We'll be exploring other stories throughout the Heritage area. We're actually going to take a quick hop over to Clark County in Berryville, and we will catch up with you there.